My name is Maren Holt, 25 years old. The gravel scraped into my knees as I stumbled forward, the sting biting deeper than the summer sun overhead. The heat pressed against my skin, but inside, all I felt was a shiver of cold. Before I could steady myself, my father's hand clamped around my wrist, iron hard, unforgiving, and yanked me back as if I were nothing more than a stray object littering his driveway. "Don't you ever block your sister's car again," he growled, dragging me across the rough stones. His words cracked like a whip, leaving no room for protest. I wasn't blocking anything. All I'd done was step outside for a moment to grab a biochemistry textbook from the porch when Lena, in her impatient urgency, decided she had to leave that second. "Dad, she's in the way again," she had shrieked, her voice shrill and practiced. That one whine was enough to spark his fury. Before I could explain, he had me by the wrist. Before I could breathe, I was being dragged like some discarded object in front of neighbors who pretended not to see. From the porch, my mother stood watching, her iced tea glass balanced perfectly in her hand. Her lips pursed in faint amusement, as if she were observing some dull routine she'd grown used to. Her silence was worse than words. It was agreement dressed in apathy. And then came the shove. A hard, deliberate push that sent me crashing backward into the plastic trash can stationed at the curb. The lid banged open with a hollow clatter, the sharp stench of rot slamming into my nose as my back hit the inside wall. For a split second, the lid flapped before snapping down again, sealing me in darkness and humiliation. A chorus of snickering filtered through. The sound of a phone camera clicking confirmed it. My sister, Lena, in her pastel sundress, held her phone steady, recording like she was capturing a comedy clip. Her voice cut into me with sugar-coated venom. "Finally in a place that fits, don't you think?" I pressed my palms against the rim, trying to push the lid open, but the angle was awkward. The trash walls caved around me, the humiliation pressing heavier than the plastic. For a wild moment, I thought I might suffocate. When I finally managed to shove my way out, I didn't look at any of them. Not at my father, who adjusted his belt as if nothing had happened. Not at my mother, who sipped her tea and murmured, "At least that trash can's finally got some use." And not at Lena, who laughed like she had won something valuable. Instead, I turned away. My knees throbbed, my palms were scraped raw, and my pride bled out invisibly. I didn't scream, though the urge swelled in my throat. I didn't cry, though my eyes burned. I just walked back inside, each step heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. I locked myself in the basement room, the one place they considered beneath them, so they rarely entered. A naked bulb buzzed faintly above, casting yellow light across the concrete floor. The hum seemed louder than usual, like it was mocking me. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at the wall, waiting for something inside me to break open. But it didn't. The rage boiled quietly instead, like water simmering just before a boil. I was 25, a graduate in biochemistry, still applying for entry-level research roles that paid little more than survival. No job yet, no money, just a temporary stay at my parents' house while I scraped together enough to rent a small apartment. A few weeks, I had told myself, just a few weeks. But every day here was a punishment. It hadn't always been like this. My father had once been not warm, but decent. A man of structure, someone whose approval I thought could be earned if I worked hard enough. That belief crumbled when Lena turned 15. Suddenly, she became the center of every spotlight. Ballet classes, private dance schools, summer programs abroad, France, Italy, always Lena, always shining. When I asked for a new pair of shoes for a lab internship, they told me flatly, "Your sister needs that money for her summer intensive." Their eyes carried no shame. It was simply fact. She was the investment. I was the burden. Over time, neglect shifted into something darker. A cold war where silence was punishment and favoritism was weaponized. Tonight's trash can incident was not an exception. It was the rule. The basement air pressed thick against my lungs. I wanted to scream into the buzzing silence, to demand why I wasn't enough, why my existence seemed to drain them of dignity. But my throat stayed closed, my hands knotted into fists. The evening crept by. I didn't go upstairs for dinner. Hunger clawed at me, but the thought of facing their sneers was heavier. At 11 o'clock, the knock came, sharp, hard, deliberate. My mother's voice followed, flat as ever. "You going to sulk down there all night, or are you planning to clean up that trash you scattered across the driveway?" I opened the door. She stood with the same iced tea glass in hand, condensation dripping onto her fingers. Her gaze was icy, her words cutting. "You know what you are, Marin," she said, tapping her glass lightly with her nail, as though punctuating her thought. "A leech. That degree of yours? Fake education, paperweight. Lena is building something real. You just stink up our space." Her eyes didn't waver. She turned and walked away before I could answer. The words sank like stones. I wasn't just unwanted. I was worthless in their eyes, nothing more than trash they couldn't throw out quickly enough. I stood in the doorway long after she disappeared. The bulb buzzed overhead, steady and merciless. For a moment, I imagined walking out the door barefoot, leaving it all behind. But where would I go? My bank account barely held $93. No job offers, no friends left who hadn't been scared away by my family's cruelty. I closed the door, back into the hum of the basement, back into the silence that carried all the things I couldn't say. And yet, deep inside me, something small stirred, something sharp. Not a scream, not a sob, a promise. One day, I thought, they will regret the way they dragged me through gravel and trash. They will regret laughing while I suffocated in their cruelty. But for now, I sat still, waiting, planning. And the rage boiled, silent but alive. Morning crept in with a thin slice of light along the basement window, a blade of brightness that made the dust look like snow. I didn't sleep. The bulb had hummed all night, as if in competition with my thoughts, the echo of my mother's voice replaying on a loop. Leech, fake education, stink up our space. By dawn, the words had settled like sediment, ugly, heavy, unmoving. I climbed the stairs carefully, palms stinging when I pressed them on the railing. The kitchen was too quiet. No kettle hiss, no spoons clinking against ceramic, no television droning on about morning traffic. On the fridge, a magnet pinned a square of paper torn from a legal pad. The handwriting was my father's. Rigid, authoritative even when it was small. Road trip with Lena, gone for the week, don't mess up the house. No love, no be back soon, just an order disguised as an update. The house held its breath the way it did after a slammed door. I stood there a long time, reading the lines again, though nothing more appeared. The air smelled like last night's coleslaw and lemon cleaner. I opened a cabinet to get a glass of water and saw the emptiness. My mug was gone, the one with the chipped rim and faded molecule print. I checked the drawer where I kept a spare key, empty. I opened the hall closet where I hung my coat. Bare hanger. A bad feeling moved through me like a cold draft. I set the glass down and walked to my room. At first glance, it looked normal. The narrow bed, the desk, the stack of applications I'd filled out and triple-checked. Then my chest grew tight. The desk drawers were open, hollowed. My backpack, missing. The shoebox where I kept my passport and ID, gone. My laptop, which I always tucked under the bed like a secret I could not risk losing, wasn't there. I lifted the sheet, checked the corners, lowered myself to my knees, and peered into the dim space. Only dust and a stray bobby pin stared back. No, no, no. My phone buzzed. A text from Lena. A photo. My old blue suitcase, scuffed and taped at one corner, sitting on a cracked curb I didn't recognize. There was a chain-link fence in the background and a sign slightly out of focus, white letters on green. Her caption arrived a second later. Oops, took a detour. Hope you like the new view. My fingers went numb. Another text replaced the first. This one from a number I knew as intimately as the scrape of gravel. Dad. I answered on the second ring. Where did you... We dropped your stuff off, he said, voice flat, and for once I heard what lay underneath. Not anger, not disappointment. Calculation. You'll find it at 91st Street Shelter in Ashland. Best start learning how the world works. Dad, you can't. My ID, my laptop, my research notes. Learn to keep track of what matters. End of discussion. Don't mess up the house. He hung up. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but the blood in my ears. I walked to the porch barefoot and stepped into the light as if it would offer some answer. Heat rose from the boards. A car passed, distant and indifferent. Somewhere a dog barked. The sky was a hard blue, the kind that refuses to soften for anyone's pain. They took everything, not just clothes, not just notebooks, Everything that said I existed beyond this house, beyond this kitchen, beyond Lena's spotlight. My name reduced to a pile of fabric on a curb miles away. I stood there until the brightness blurred and a wave rolled through me, the kind that comes right before collapse. But I didn't fall. The fall was a luxury I'd never been allowed. I held the railing, sucked in air that tasted like heat and metal, and turned back inside. The kitchen clock ticked. A fly knocked itself against the window like it had a grudge. I washed my face at the sink and saw in the glass tile a reflection I barely recognized. Hair rumpled, eyes raw, gravel rash along my cheek like a map no one had taught me to read. Something moved in that reflection, though. Not rage, not yet. A kind of alertness, like the moment before you step onto a narrow beam and just decide you're going to make it across. I grabbed the first shoes I could find, old sneakers, Lena had once called charity store specials, and headed for the one door that had ever opened for me in this neighborhood without making me feel like I needed to apologize, Mrs. Talia's. Her garden always smelled like peppermint and tomato vines. When she opened the door, her eyes widened at the sight of my knees. "Sweetheart," she said, voice trembling and practical at once. "What happened?" I told her. Not every detail, I didn't have the breath, but enough. The driveway, the trash, the suitcase, my passport, my laptop, my father's voice like a padlock clicking shut. She listened without interrupting, one hand on the doorframe like she had to steady herself against what she was hearing. Then she reached for my wrist, the way a nurse does when they're about to check your pulse. Gentle, sure. "I wondered when their meanness would stop being private," she murmured. "Come in. Let me fix those knees." She sat me at her kitchen table, the oilcloth patterned with strawberries, and cleaned the scrapes with careful fingers that smelled like lavender soap. "I can't even get my suitcase," I whispered, hating the thinness of my own voice. "It's across town at a shelter. I don't have bus fare. I don't have ID. If I can't prove who I am, I can't replace anything." "You are who you are," she said, not looking up as she dabbed antiseptic on a raw patch. "No laminated card can change that. But yes, we'll need a plan." She got up with the decisiveness of someone who has emotionally rehearsed a moment for years. She opened a drawer and removed a weathered envelope. $40, she said, counting it out. And from another drawer, she pulled a business card the color of weak tea. The print had faded at the edges as if it had been waiting a while for the right pair of hands. "My nephew," she went on. "Full name's Malik, though he mostly goes by Malik. He runs a vintage restoration shop 2 towns over. Good with wood, better with people. Owes me a favor that's overdue." She slid the card across the table like a ritual. "Call him." I stared at the card. The ink wasn't crisp. The phone number had been written twice, once printed, once in pen. There was a pencil sketch of a chair in the corner with the tiniest hash marks to show shadow. It was nothing. It was everything. "You don't have to," I started. She waved me off. "I'm old. I was saving this favor for something important. This is important." I blinked hard, then stood before the gratitude could turn into another kind of helplessness. "Thank you," I said. The words felt fragile and enormous at once. At the door, she paused. "Marin?" "Yes?" "Your father's always been a builder of appearances. They think that's strength. But wood remembers the hand that works it. It keeps the warmth. It keeps the cuts. If you learn how to read it, you can make it tell a different story." She nodded at the card. "That man can teach you, if you let him." The remark settled into a part of me I hadn't known was hungry. Wood remembers. Maybe I could too. Not the way they insisted, their version where I was the mistake that ruined every picture, but the way the grain insists on running true whether or not you choose to follow it. I walked back to my porch holding $40 and a faded card like talismans. I dialed the number on my old phone, one crack away from shattering. It rang twice. "Restoration," a voice said, smooth with a rasp of sawdust in it. "Hi," I said, and felt my throat tighten, then steady. "My name is Marin. I got your number from Mrs. Talia. She said you might need help, any kind. I can clean, lift, learn. I don't have much, but I don't quit." Silence hummed on the line, but it wasn't the cruel kind. It was the kind where a person is measuring what they hear against what they know of the world. "If Talia sent you," he said at last, "you show up. That's enough for a start. Be here tomorrow, early. We open at 7. Bring grit. Leave everything else. I don't have a car, I said before I could stop myself. Then you'll find a bus, he replied, not unkindly, or a way. The work will meet you halfway if you meet it. When the call ended, the house behind me looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The note still hung lopsided on the fridge. The clock still ticked. The fly kept headbutting the window like failure could be conquered by persistence alone. I stood there barefoot, heat rising through the boards, and felt that blade of light from the basement window widen, as if some unseen hand had tilted it just enough to cut a new line across the floor. They believed they had erased me, but they had only cleared the page. I went inside, wrote the address from the card on a scrap of paper, and tucked the $40 deep into my sneaker like contraband hope. Tomorrow, I would find a bus. Tomorrow, I would show up, not as trash, not as dead weight, as something harder to throw away. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, to the plink of the kitchen sink, to the faint tap-tap of that fly, refusing to learn. Somewhere far off, a train moaned. I imagined wood under my hands, the lines in the grain, like a story waiting to be traced. I didn't know yet how to shape it. I only knew I would. The rage didn't boil over. It banked itself like coals, red and disciplined, saving heat for when it mattered. In the morning, I would leave this house. In time, I would make something from the splinters. The bus smelled like old rain and rust, the vinyl seats cracked in jagged lines that scratched against my palms when I gripped them too tightly. Every bump in the road rattled my bones, but I held on to the scrap of paper with Malik's address written in Mrs. Talia's shaky hand. The $40 were folded into my sneaker, the edges digging into my arch with every step I'd taken to the bus stop. It wasn't just money. It was proof that someone believed I still had a chance. When the bus hissed to a stop, I stepped out into air thick with sawdust and varnish. The building was unremarkable from the outside, brick dulled by years. The sign above the door faded until only the word restoration was legible. Inside, though, it was alive. The smell of wood, polish, and iron filled my lungs, and the sound of sanding, steady and rhythmic, echoed like a heartbeat. A man in his 40s stood behind a workbench, sleeves rolled up, hands coated in dust. His skin was rough, the kind that carried years of work, but his eyes were sharp, alert. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply studied me. "You must be Talia's girl," he said. I nodded, swallowing the urge to explain my whole life in a single breath. "Yes, Marin Holt." "Work starts at 7, he said, glancing at the clock. "You're on time. Good. Grab that broom." There was no introduction. No easing in, just a broom shoved into my hand and a floor coated in layers of sawdust. I swept until my shoulders burned, the fine powder sticking to my skin like a second coat. When I was done, he pointed at a stack of carved bedposts. "Sand them down, every groove. Don't rush." The first drag of sandpaper burned my fingers. The second made them ache. By the 10th, blisters had formed, raw and red. Still, I kept going. Hours blurred until the world shrank to the scrape of sandpaper and the sting in my hands. At lunch, Malik tossed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. I hadn't noticed the hunger gnawing at me until that moment. I ate quickly, almost ashamed of how desperately I needed it. He watched, but said nothing. By evening, when I finally set down the sandpaper, I felt hollowed out, my arms trembling from the effort. Malik inspected the bedposts, ran his hand over one, and grunted. "Passable. Tomorrow better." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. For me, that was enough. The days bled into weeks. Each morning, I showed up with the first bus, sweeping, sanding, hauling pieces twice my weight. I cut my palms on splinters, stained my clothes with varnish, and sometimes fell asleep on the cot Malik let me use in the back room. But slowly I learned. The sound of a plane cutting cleanly against wood, the smell of stain settling into oak, the patience it took to coax life back into something abandoned. The work hurt, but it didn't humiliate. The pain here was honest. It came from effort, not cruelty. The first time I finished a piece on my own, a small bench that had been cracked along its legs, I presented it to Malik with hands trembling more from nerves than exhaustion. He circled it, fingers trailing across the joints I'd glued, the fabric I'd reupholstered. He didn't smile. He didn't clap me on the back. He just nodded. "You've got grit," he said simply. The words nearly undid me. No one in my family had ever called me that. No one had ever looked past the failures, past the comparisons, to acknowledge what it cost me to keep standing. With the stipend Malik paid, I bought a secondhand burner phone and one change of clothes from the thrift store down the street. They weren't much, but they were mine. I kept my head down, worked, and at night, read whatever manuals I could find on design and restoration. I studied like my life depended on it, because it did. By the third month, Malik handed me my first client. A wealthy widow named Mrs. Cartwright wanted her late husband's roll-top desk restored. The piece was old, its once rich oak dulled, its corners dented. I worked on it for 2 weeks straight, every night polishing until my fingers cramped, every morning rechecking each groove for missed dust. When I delivered it, Mrs. Cartwright ran her hand across the surface, her eyes wet. "I haven't seen it shine like this since our wedding," she whispered. She pressed an envelope into my hands, insisting I keep it. Behind the shop, I opened it. More cash than I had ever held in my life. My breath caught, my chest tight with something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Still, silence from my family. Not a call. Not even to gloat. They had erased me from their narrative completely, as if I'd never existed. Some nights, I would scroll through Lena's public Instagram on the burner phone, masochism disguised as curiosity. There she was, poolside in designer swimsuits, sipping champagne, always framed by my parents' smiles. One photo froze me. A luxury picnic spread across the backyard lawn, champagne flutes catching sunlight. The caption read, "When dead weight finally disappears, life tastes like rosé." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. Dead weight. That was me. Erased, dismissed, celebrated for being gone. I thought I had buried the rage in sawdust and varnish, but it came roaring back. Not chaos this time. Clarity. If they thought I was dead weight, they were about to learn that the things you throw away have a way of returning sharper, stronger. I would not just survive, I would eclipse them. And for the first time, I realized survival was only the beginning. The shop became my world. Sawdust clung to my hair, varnish seeped into the lines of my hands, and splinters decorated my palms like battle scars. But it was a world where I belonged, where the weight of every bruise and every scar meant progress, not punishment. At night, when the town dimmed and the streets outside emptied, I pulled my cot closer to the workbench and opened textbooks I'd borrowed from the library. Carpentry manuals, interior design guides, anything that explained how wood could be bent, carved, or coaxed back into life. I read with the same urgency I once poured into biochemistry notes, except this time the knowledge didn't feel like an abstract formula. It felt like survival, like breath. I began to sketch designs on scraps of paper, tables, chairs, bed frames, some simple, some ornate. Malik caught me one night, hunched over a sketch while the lamp burned low. He studied it without speaking, then slid a sharper pencil across the bench. "Lines matter," he said simply, and walked away. That was his way. Few words, no empty encouragements, but every so often a gesture that told me he saw me, really saw me. The stipend he gave was small, but I stretched it until it grew legs. I opened a thrift store laptop, battered and slow, and created an online profile, Heart Restoration. I couldn't bear to use my family's name anymore, not when every syllable carried the echo of their dismissal. So I gave myself a new one, Rue Hart. Rue, because I had been their regret, their burden, but also because rue is a plant that grows despite bitterness, stubborn and strong. Heart, because it sounded like heart, and I needed one that was mine alone. The first sale on Etsy was small, a jewelry box I restored from a cracked cedar chest. Then came a coffee table, then a dresser. Orders trickled in, then flowed. Some weeks I barely slept, working in the shop by day and sketching or answering clients by night. Malik never commented on the exhaustion, but he started leaving a thermos of coffee near my cot in the mornings. The rhythm was brutal, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. And yet, I couldn't help myself. Some nights I still checked Lena's social media. My parents' faces were always there, glowing with pride that never belonged to me. Galas, vacations, laughter around long tables I was never invited to. They posted photos of Lena's charity events, her speaking at fundraisers, her arm looped through their shoulders. One caption from my mother made my stomach turn. "So proud of our shining star. Every family has one. Every family has one." As if by definition, there could only be one. As if by definition, I was never it. I clicked away before the bitterness could consume me, and instead poured it into the grain of oak and mahogany, into sanding until the wood was smooth enough to see myself in. 2 years passed like that. My name, Rue Hart, circulated quietly among interior designers, real estate stagers, even a television set decorator who ordered a series of custom pieces. I rented a small workshop of my own, still close enough to Malik to visit, but separate, independent. One night, I checked my business email while sipping instant coffee in the back room. Most messages were the usual: inquiries, requests for quotes. But then one subject line caught my eye. Inquiry for custom dining table, urgent. The sender's name froze me. Martha Brenton. My mother. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake, some coincidence of names. But the message made it clear. Hello, we are hosting a fundraiser gala in our backyard. My daughter Lena will be the primary host. We need a statement centerpiece dining table for 40 guests. Must be elegant, durable, and memorable. Please confirm your availability and quote, Martha. She didn't know. She had no idea the name on the other end of the email belonged to the daughter she'd tossed out like garbage. To her, I was a stranger, a vendor, a tool to decorate her performance of perfection. I laughed, sharp and humorless, the sound echoing against the workshop walls. After years of silence, this was their first attempt to reach me, and they didn't even realize it. I typed a response with steady fingers. Yes, I'm available. For a project of this scale and urgency, my rate will be double my standard. Payment up front. Delivery in 6 weeks. The reply came within an hour. No hesitation, no questions, just agreement. The weeks that followed were a blur of design and determination. I poured everything I had into that table. Not just skill, not just precision, but history. The polished oak gleamed under my hands, but beneath it, carved into the underside where only a careful eye would notice, I left messages. Etched truths. Words only they would understand. Every cut, every line was deliberate, not just furniture, but testimony. When it was finished, I ran my hand along its surface and felt a strange stillness. It was beautiful. It was brutal. It was mine. On the day of delivery, I didn't go. I hired a driver. I couldn't trust myself to stand in that backyard again. Not yet. But I included something beneath the centerpiece glass. A folded letter. No rage, no rant, just truth. You dragged me across the driveway like I was nothing. But I turned your driveway into my launching point. This table is the only piece of me you'll ever afford again. Signed, Rue Hart. Hours later, Malik returned from making a delivery across town. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. Heard your table stole the show. What did they say? I asked before I could stop myself. He shrugged, though a hint of satisfaction tugged at his mouth. Lena nearly fainted. Your mother locked herself in her room. Your father stormed out shouting about traitors in front of 30 guests. A silence stretched, and then he added, Sounds like they recognized your work. I sat down hard on the stool, breath uneven. They recognized it. Not just the craftsmanship, the truth I carved into it. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible to them. I was undeniable. But instead of relief, what I felt was deeper, sharper. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The story of the table spread faster than I expected. Within days, word reached me through a designer friend that the gala hadn't gone as planned. Guests whispered about the meltdown in the Brenton household, about how the Starr family had fractured mid-celebration. My father's voice had thundered across the lawn, accusing everyone of betrayal. My mother never came back downstairs, and Lena was seen pacing the garden with her phone glued to her ear, her perfect smile cracked wide open. I didn't post about it. I didn't boast. I just went back to work, though the image of them unraveling around a table built by my hands played in the back of my mind like a secret film reel. I should have felt satisfied, and part of me did, but another part stayed restless. Because the truth is, one table wasn't enough. Orders piled in after that, not from them, but from others who'd seen the table, who'd whispered about the name Rue Hart. I poured myself into every piece. Chairs with intricate joints, cabinets polished to a mirror shine, even a custom bed frame for a film set. Each one was a small rebellion, proof that the daughter they had discarded had built something with her own hands, her own name. At night, though, when the shop went quiet and the last stain dried, I felt the hollowness return. Revenge had given me a taste of justice, but not closure. My family hadn't apologized. They hadn't even reached out. They had simply absorbed the humiliation and gone silent, the same way they always had when reality didn't fit their story. It was like shouting into a void. Months later, a cheap envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. I nearly tossed it, assuming it was junk, but the handwriting made me pause. Slanted, rushed, my father's. I tore it open. Inside was a single photo. My childhood home. The shutters peeling, the paint dull, the lawn unkempt. Across the bottom of the picture, written in uneven ink, were 2 words: foreclosure pending. I stared at it until the edges of the photo blurred. The house wasn't just wood and nails, it was the altar where I'd been sacrificed again and again to keep their image intact. It was where my blood had smeared across gravel, where my mother had tapped her glass and called me a leech, where Lena had filmed me in a trash can. And now it was collapsing. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. Something quieter filled me. Stillness. Malik noticed before I even told him. I was sanding down a walnut table when he said, almost casually, "Your hands are too heavy today." I set the sandpaper aside. "They're losing the house," I admitted. He sipped his tea, watching me with those sharp eyes. "And what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing." "Are you sure?" I hesitated. The word hung in the air, fragile. Was I sure? A part of me wanted to watch them drown in their own debts, to let the walls they worshipped finally crumble. Another part whispered of retribution, of using this moment to carve the final chapter. "I'm not going to save them," I said finally. My voice sounded harder than I expected. "But maybe I'll give them something else. One last thing to remember." Malik didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just set his cup down and said, "Make sure it's yours, not theirs." The auction day approached quickly. I didn't attend. Instead, I called a young couple I'd once helped, a pair who had just had their first baby and whose furniture I'd restored for free after a storm ruined nearly everything they owned. They were kind, struggling, the kind of people who knew value beyond price. I asked them for a favor. When the gavel fell, they won the bid. The house, my prison, was no longer in my family's name. That wasn't the revenge. That was just the shift. 2 weeks later, I printed invitations on fine embossed cardstock, the kind my mother would have approved of for her galas. At the top, in gold letters, it read, "Open House Celebration, a new beginning for 27 Burwood Drive." I delivered them by hand, one to my parents, one to Lena. I stood across the street on the day of the open house, hidden behind a hedge as their car pulled up. They stepped out dressed as if attending a social event, not a stranger's party. Hope lingered on their faces. Maybe they thought it was reconciliation. Maybe they believed I was finally crawling back. Instead, the new couple stood at the doorway, cradling their baby, smiles warm but steady. A handmade wooden sign rested in the front lawn. This home was rebuilt with grace, not guilt. My father froze, confusion twisting his mouth. My mother blinked rapidly, as though trying to wake from a dream. Lena flushed crimson, clutching her clutch bag like it could shield her. And then the wife of the young couple said softly, "You must be here for Rue. She gave us everything." The name struck them like a blow. I stepped from behind the hedge, no makeup, no designer clothes, just overalls, gloves, and a clipboard in hand. They froze. My father was the first to speak, his voice cracked with fury. "Why? Why would you give them the house after everything? After everything," I cut in, my voice steady. "Yes, after the gravel, after the trash, after the silence. I gave it to someone who would never use the kitchen counter to bash my face, who would never scream from the staircase until I was small enough to fit inside a trash can, who would never call me dead weight." Lena stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said, my smile faint but real. "This makes me free." She scoffed, eyes flashing. "You could have helped us. You should have. You're our daughter." I met her gaze, steady. "You threw your daughter in a trash can. You don't get to act shocked when she becomes recyclable." Their silence was louder than any scream, but I wasn't done. I reached into my bag and handed them a small wooden box, polished, simple, but weighted with meaning. "Open it," I said. Inside was a crushed soda can, an old photo of me at 25, knees bloody, face humiliated, half inside the trash can. Beneath it, a note in my handwriting. You taught me what worthlessness looks like, so I gave it back. I closed the lid gently. They left without another word. And for the first time, I didn't feel like trash. I felt like truth. They didn't return my calls, though truthfully, I hadn't made any. After that day in front of the house, my parents and Lena retreated into silence, the kind they had perfected long before. No explosions, no demands, just absence. A vacuum where family should have been. But unlike before, the silence no longer strangled me, it fed me. Because for the first time, they were the ones haunted. By the sign in the lawn. By the box I placed in their hands. By the realization that I wasn't broken, not anymore. Still, I couldn't stop myself from looking. Late at night, while projects dried under layers of varnish, I checked Lena's social media. It wasn't the bright display of champagne and poolside laughter anymore. The photos grew fewer. The smiles looked tight. Captions sounded forced. Hashtags recycled. The comments were filled with questions she never answered. Once, she posted a blurry shot of a coffee cup with the words, "Some people bite the hand that fed them." Sad world. I didn't reply, but I read it 3 times before setting my phone down, heart steady, unshaken. Because I remembered the taste of gravel in my mouth. I remembered the sting of trash can walls against my back, and I knew the truth. Their hands hadn't fed me. They'd starved me. Work consumed me again. The orders increased, enough to hire 2 apprentices who looked at me the way I used to look at Malik, half in awe, half in disbelief that someone would trust them with responsibility. I taught them the way he taught me, blunt but steady, no wasted words, no false kindness. One afternoon, as I guided one of them through restoring an ornate chair leg, a letter slipped through the shop's mail slot. No return address. Inside, only another photo of the house, except this time, the for sale sign was gone. The shutters were painted a pale blue, the lawn neatly trimmed. The couple I had helped stood in the yard, holding their baby, now a toddler, their faces glowing with joy. On the back of the photo was a note in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Rue. This home feels alive again." I pinned it above my workbench, right where the sunlight hit in the mornings. The house wasn't mine anymore, not as a prison, not as a wound. It was theirs now, and that meant it was something new. Something I had remade, not with hammers or nails, but with choice. A week later, Malik stopped by. He hadn't been around much, busy with his own work, letting me run mine. He walked through the shop slowly, running his hand over the finished pieces lined along the walls. "You've built something real," he said finally. I met his gaze. "I think so." "You going to stop there?" I hesitated. The old hunger, the one for revenge, for recognition, still simmered. But it wasn't the same as before. It didn't roar. It whispered. "I don't want to destroy them anymore," I said. "I want to outlast them." He smiled faintly, a rare expression on his face. "That's the sharper blade." But the universe wasn't finished with me yet. Because a month later, I opened my email to find a name I knew too well. Hidden beneath a generic Gmail account, but transparent all the same. Lena. The subject line, commission inquiry. The message was short, clipped, as if typed through clenched teeth. "Dear Rue, I saw your work at a recent event. Your designs are strong, unique. I'd like to discuss a custom piece for my new apartment. Urgent timeline. Please confirm." She hadn't signed it with her name, but the rhythm of her words, the sharp precision, the demand hidden inside the request, it was her. For a long moment, I stared at the screen. This was the girl who had filmed me in a trash can, the girl who had posted a picnic photo with the caption, "Dead weight finally disappears." The girl who had stepped forward on the lawn, sneering, "You think this makes you better than us?" Now she wanted my hands, my time, my name. I typed only 2 words, request declined. Then I blocked the email. That night, lying in my bed with sawdust still clinging to my arms, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I once was. I wasn't even vengeful. I was free. And freedom, I realized, was not something you win once. It was something you choose every single day. I returned to the shop the next morning and stood beneath the photo pinned above my bench, the couple smiling in front of the house that had once broken me. Sunlight hit the paper, turning it almost gold. The house was alive again, and so was I. The weeks following Lena's failed email brought a strange calm, not silence like before, the suffocating kind that pressed on my chest, but a stillness I had chosen. My life had narrowed into the rhythm of chisels and sandpaper, into the laughter of my apprentices, into the occasional smile from a client who saw their grandmother's dresser restored to life. But calm doesn't erase memory, and memory has a way of calling itself forward when you least expect it. One evening, while locking up the shop, I saw an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the street lamp, but I felt it before I confirmed it. Someone was watching. I waited, keys cold in my palm. The car lingered, then pulled away without a sound. I didn't need to see the driver to know who had sent them. The very next morning, I decided the story wasn't finished. Not for them, not for me. I thought of that house, my house, now full of warmth that had nothing to do with bloodlines. I thought of how my parents had once held court in that same living room, their glasses raised, their smiles fixed like portraits. I thought of how they'd looked standing in the yard, eyes wide when the new couple welcomed them with grace they didn't deserve. And I knew. I wasn't going to watch them fade into silence. I was going to orchestrate an ending they couldn't ignore. The idea came easily. A public unveiling, but not theirs, mine. I printed another invitation, this time more deliberate. Fine cardstock, embossed letters. It read, "Open House Celebration, a new beginning for 27 Burwood Drive." I mailed copies to people who mattered to them. Distant relatives, old business partners, even neighbors who used to nod approvingly when Lena twirled in her recital costumes. And of course, I sent one directly to my parents, another to Lena. I hand-delivered theirs. My mother opened the door, surprise flickering before she masked it with disdain. "What is this?" she asked, holding the invitation like it might stain her fingers. "An open house," I replied simply. 2 weeks from Saturday. Her eyes narrowed. "Why would you invite us?" "Because," I said, my voice calm, "you taught me that appearances are everything. Consider this, my final performance." I turned before she could respond, leaving her standing there, the invitation trembling ever so slightly between her fingers. The day arrived. The lawn was trimmed, flowers blooming in the garden bed I had once weeded under my father's barked commands. A wooden sign stood proudly at the edge of the yard, words carved by my own hands. This home was rebuilt with grace, not guilt. The couple I had helped waited at the door, their child now toddling between them. They greeted guests warmly, offering lemonade and cookies. Laughter drifted through the air, easy and unforced. Across the street, I watched as my parents' car pulled up. Lena stepped out first, designer heels clicking against the pavement. My father followed, jaw clenched. My mother trailed behind, her face unreadable. For a moment, they just stared. At the sign, at the family in the doorway, at the people filling the lawn who should have been their audience. Then, slowly, they crossed. "You!" my father spat when he saw me emerge from behind the hedge, my work gloves still on, overalls dusted with sawdust. "What is this circus?" "Not a circus," I said evenly. "A celebration. A home that finally belongs to people who understand its worth." "You gave it away?" His voice cracked, high and furious. "After all the years Years you dragged me across gravel," I interrupted. "Years you threw me into trash cans. Years you erased me until I had no name but dead weight. Yes, after those years." My mother's eyes darted everywhere but at me. Her lips pressed thin, the same way they had when she dismissed me with a tap of her glass. Lena stepped forward, her face red. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said softly. "This makes me free." The couple's child tugged at her mother's dress just then, giggling, and the sound pierced the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. Guests smiled. Conversations resumed. My family, for once, weren't the stars of the show. They were shadows at the edge of something they couldn't control. But I hadn't finished. From my bag, I pulled out a polished wooden box, simple but deliberate. I held it out. "Here," I said, "something for you to keep, since you've lost everything else." My father snatched it, scowling, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a crushed soda can, bent and sharp. Beside it, an old photo of me at 25. Knees bloodied, face humiliated, trapped half inside that plastic trash can. Beneath them, a folded note in my handwriting. He opened it with shaking hands. "You taught me what worthlessness looks like, so I gave it back." His face drained of color. My mother turned away. Lena's eyes glistened, though whether from rage or shame, I couldn't tell. I closed the box gently, my voice steady. "This is the only inheritance I'll ever return to you." They left without another word. And as their car pulled away, swallowed by the road, I felt the last chain snap. The house no longer belonged to them, neither did I. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was Rue Hart, and Rue Hart was free. They didn't come back. Not that day, not the next, not ever. The Brentons, my parents, my sister, vanished into the same silence they had used all my life to erase me. But this time it wasn't power, it was surrender. The young couple moved fully into the house a week later. I visited quietly one afternoon, standing across the street. Curtains fluttered in windows where I once hid tears. A child's laughter spilled from the backyard where I had scrubbed gravel from my knees. The house was no longer haunted. It was alive, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to look at it. My shop thrived. Orders kept coming. My apprentices grew more confident, sketching their own designs, sanding with hands that no longer trembled. Clients began to recognize my name, Rue Hart, not as a whisper, but as a promise of quality, of honesty. I no longer checked Lena's social media. I no longer searched for my parents in the crowd. I didn't need to. Their story had ended for me. Mine had just begun. But the past has a way of scratching at the door. Almost a year later, another email slipped through my business inbox. The name on it was different. Generic, polite, but I knew the voice behind the words. Dear Rue, I admire your work. I'm seeking a designer for a very personal project. Discretion required. Please confirm availability. It was Lena. She hadn't signed it, but I knew. The cadence, the clipped urgency, the entitlement wrapped in politeness. It was her. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, remembering her laugh as she filmed me in the trash can, her scoff when she said, "You think this makes you better than us?" I typed only 3 words, request declined, permanently. Then I blocked the address. Some nights, I wondered if my parents still sat in that crumbling silence, waiting for me to crawl back. If Lena still scrolled my website in secret, hands itching to claim my work as hers. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. It didn't matter, because my life was no longer shaped by their absence or their cruelty. It was shaped by my own hands, by every grain of wood I coaxed back to life, by every client who looked at a restored piece and whispered, "It's beautiful." I learned something in those years of sawdust and scars. Survival is not revenge. Survival is creation. Revenge had been the spark, yes. It had lit the fire that pushed me to carve truth into oak and maple. But fire doesn't last forever. What endures is what you build from the ashes. Now, every chair, every table, every jewelry box I restored became a testament, not to what they did to me, but to what I became in spite of it. Sometimes clients asked about the name. Why Rue Hart? I always smiled, because it reminds me that bitterness can still bloom, and because a heart isn't something you inherit, it's something you build. One evening, as the shop lights glowed warm against the night, Malik stopped by. He studied the pieces lined up for delivery, the laughter of my apprentices echoing from the back room. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Thanks to you," I replied. He shook his head. "No, thanks to grit. That's rarer than talent. Don't forget it." I never did. The photo of the couple in front of the house still hung above my workbench. Sunlight touched it every morning, turning it almost golden. Each time I looked at it, I remembered where I had come from, but more importantly, where I chose to go. Not revenge, not survival, freedom. And freedom, I learned, was a craft too. One you practiced every day. I never saw my family again. Not truly, not in any way that mattered. But once in a while, when the wood creaked just so under my hands, I swore I could still hear the echo of gravel beneath my knees. And instead of shuddering, I smiled. Because I had turned that gravel into the foundation of something unbreakable. I was no longer their burden. I was Rue Hart, and Rue Hart was free.